There it is. Okay, cool. There we go. Okay. So now we're like live streaming to YouTube now so that I can be sure that's happening. But anyway, so polyvagal theory in the 1990s started training therapists that it's important to talk very gently to your patient so that you don't trigger the freeze response, which they indicate is something called the dorsal vagal branch. Dorsal is usually kind of directionally going to refer to the back side, towards the back of your head, towards the back of your body. There's sort of a branching of the vagus nerve that goes backwards, and seemingly, not really, but yeah, kind of. There's a branch of the vagus nerve that seems to be more ventral, meaning forward, like, or anterior or whatever. So, in polyvagal theory, part of the reason I think they got so much attention in the beginning was because they said this is a theory developed on evolutionary precepts, because allegedly Stephen Porges did an anatomical studies on rabbits and showed that the reason that a rabbit goes into a freeze response is because the dorsal portion of the vagus nerve is activating and freezing their body. So if you can talk in a way that doesn't trigger the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, then the patient won't go into a traumatic re-experiencing. So these are cool theories. These are cool ideas to play with. Now, what else? Anything else from polyvagal theory that was important? Yeah, they said that specifically the vagus nerve was sort of how do they explain it? They basically said that the reason that humans are so advanced is because of the vagus nerve. But it was that there was some kind of an evolutionary or adaptive change where humans utilized the vagus nerve to be more pro-social. Is that humans were unique in using the vagus nerve to be more in harmony with other people versus other animals. So that was another precept of the polyvagal theory. Another one was that there's something called resting sinus arrhythmia, or RSA. And resting sinus arrhythmia is basically what happens when you take a deep breath in, is that it stimulates your vagus nerve and it puts downward pressure on your heart to slow it down, which has a relaxing feeling. So you might find in a polyvagal therapy session an emphasis on, hey, let's pause right now and take a deep breath. And that kind of helps to physiologically calm the person down. So that's all good. That's like a good idea. I'm for that. But what polyvagal theory stated is that this is a unique trait in humans that wouldn't be found in other animals. And it especially would only be found in like tetrapods, so like land walking mammals. And that you wouldn't find that in the ocean, for instance. That was kind of like an idea that the resting sinus arrhythmia is a unique feature of pro-social creatures. Now, spoiler alert, the paper from 2023 by Paul Grossman does lay out that, for instance, freshwater eels literally will come to the surface and breathe and activate their vagus nerve to slow down their heart, and that allows them to do oxygen exchange. So right there, this polyvagal theory from 1994 is almost immediately refuted based on its core precept, which is that this resting sinus arrhythmia is a unique walking land mammal trait that gives humans the ability to love and to be in connection and communion with each other, to be more pro-social and all these kinds of things. But anatomically speaking, the exact same mechanism exists in humans, chimpanzees, rabbits, frogs, snakes, eels, and fish. There's not that much of a difference between all of those. So that was one big red flag for polyvagal theory. And specifically, polyvagal theory is well developed, a huge therapeutic modality to try to. I think they did good work in that they tried to take some of the theories of like embodied awareness, or maybe even the interesting thing is like, so polyvagal theory doesn't ever mention chakras in their system. But if you look at like ancient therapy or ancient Vedic practices, they mention the chakra system throughout the body. And if you look at an anatomical picture comparing the vagus nerve to the chakra system, you see immediately that there's a instant overlap. There's an instant like visual correlation between, okay, the heart chakra, there's a massive bundle of vagal fibers around the heart. Okay, there's a massive bundle of vagus nerves in the stomach, in the intestines. All of these areas line up. In the throat too. The vagus nerve is huge for the throat and your ability to speak. And there's the throat chakra. And then there's also this third eye chakra, which I find to be kind of interesting. And recently, now I'll get back to polyvagal theory, but now I'm kind of diverting into some of the ideas that were never included in polyvagal theory, but I think deserve to be mentioned, because I think they're actually relevant. I mean, why throw away thousands of years of human insight into the body just to create a theory? I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's the right way to go. And also, we just know that based on, again, real how polyvagal theory was debunked basically is not because people argued about it. They just said, okay, well, Stephen Porges, if polyvagal is real, then if we just put an electrode on the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve and we stimulate it with electricity, according to you, the heart rate should slow down. And they did that. And guess what? Nothing happened. So there is no connection between the dorsal vagal branch and the freeze response. That was one of the core conjectures of polyvagal theory. So that's out the window. That's totally debunked. And it also raises big concerns about, well, why did Porges say that in the first place? He never tested it. He didn't do any of that work in the first place, but he said it. So, I mean, again, I'm not here to say there's consequences for putting a theory out that's wrong. But, again, there has to be updates. You have to be open to, okay, well, maybe polyvagal theory got some things. I mean, they did good things, but at the same time, I mean, I think humans deserve to have a good theory of the vagus nerve. It's important. Polyvagal theory attempted to combine the autonomic science of the vagus nerve to why certain types of therapy are better. That's it. Like talking to someone in a nice, calm, respectful way is generally not going to trigger their body to go into a fight or flight response. So I mean, I think that's a hugely valuable contribution to the science of therapy, for sure. No question there. But as adults, I mean, I think we do deserve a better, like a theory that's updated. So that's kind of what Nemertean theory is. And the reason that it's called Nemertean theory is actually really quite funny. And this is where Nemertean theory becomes weird. So I'm just assuming, in my paper that I published today, officially, like with a DOI, and it's like, it's a scientific publication now, so it's peer reviewable. If you like it, you can review it I'll have it on Research Hub, and you can go peer review it. If you like it, you can say so. If you don't like it, you can challenge me on it, and I'll go toe to toe on the theory. But the reason it's called Nemertean theory is because in that kind of gap, 2 years of okay, well, here I am is working in coaching and working with people and teaching them about their vagus nerve and all these kinds of things. Okay, so polyvagal's dead. What do we do? Well, basically what you have to do um, is you have to reevaluate. And it was funny, I was on Twitter a lot more at that time, around those years, because that's where Paul Grossman was doing his refutation. I mean, he was publishing papers on Twitter. So a corollary to that, as I saw this video, this really interesting video of this worm called a Nemertean worm, and it shoots this white, long, branching, complex proboscis out of its forehead, right out of its forehead. And it shoots this thing and it stings its target and it does all kinds of weird things, and it can be detached and regrow, and it does all kinds of weird things with this Nemertean proboscis, which I had never seen before. Prior to, I think, 2022, 2023 was the first time I had even really become aware of this Nemertean worm. And it's unique in the animal kingdom. But did you know that the Nemertean worm is in all marine environments around the world? It's even in freshwater. It's in saltwater, of course. It's on every coast of every continent of the entire planet. It's the longest worm it's the longest living creature that we know of in the world. So it has the ability to grow endlessly. It branches out in a very complex way. It regenerates. It produces an immune system for the worm. It produces mucus. It produces digestive enzymes. It seems to have an intelligence of its own. So there's lots of little features that I started to learn about this Nemertean worm proboscis. And the fact that it shoots not out of the mouth, but out of the forehead, and it lays dormant through the entire body until it's ready to strike. These ideas started kind of percolating in my mind. And I will admit here is that I I did not detach the fact that I do have a core belief that we learn things when we need to learn them. And this plays on my theories on kind of like Orkawar consciousness, which is an admission that there's something akin to a god, or there's some kind of a source playing a role in our lives. So I do like Nemertean is very open to the idea of a god or something like that. So I don't believe it was a coincidence that right at the time that I was learning, because I'm an expert in the vagus nerve factually. Like like I can go toe to toe on any topic of the vagus nerve. I've looked at it for 7 years. I've administered like coaching to like probably 1,000 plus people in private, through my work on on Facebook. So I know my shit. And as soon as this polyvagal theory got debunked, it was like, okay, what now? And then as I'm kind of scrolling through Twitter, I see that video of the Nemertean worm. And I didn't have an aha moment right then. I just had oh, that's disgusting. Like, what the hell is that? And I recognized that that gross feeling, that's actually your vagus nerve. So when you vomit, when you gag, when you have that gut nasty feeling, that is actually your vagus nerve signaling something to you. And I had that very visceral reaction from seeing that Nemertean worm. And I was like, that's interesting. So I took notice of that. And I have this theory as well, kind of in this same modality of like, so for instance, and I know I'm kind of weaving through a lot of things, but Nemertean vagus nerve origin theory is a massive undertaking, and this won't be the last time I talk about this, but I do want to set some key argument points here that I'll probably be talking about and defending for the rest of my life. Hopefully like maybe for 100 years, I'll be talking about Nemertean theory, and there will be millions of other people talking about Nemertean theory, and it will add up very fast. But I found this Nemertean worm right at that time. So I actually do take that as a somewhat of a hint that I was meant to see it at that time. And so I didn't just say, "Oh, well, I need to publish this theory." I had to look into it a lot. And so on my screen, I have a live stream just so for people who are viewing through YouTube or Facebook, you can kind of see some of the pictures that I think are relevant to this. This first picture I have on the screen is of an eel sticking its mouth up to the surface of water and taking a big gulp of air, which that picture right there essentially debunks polyvagal theory. And I don't know why Stephen Porges didn't know about that, but he just didn't consider there was and also they have their vagus nerve activates when they breathe air. So they measured an eel's vagus nerve as it took a breath in, and it slowed its heart rate down. And it wasn't the dorsal branch, it was just the whole vagus nerve. So right there, that picture and the study on that vagus nerve of an eel debunks polyvagal theory, its core proposition right there. And that's indicated. You can go read the Paul Grossman paper, which is the third citation in my Nemertean theory. So I am citing Paul Grossman in this. And he lays it out very clearly. It's like this is the death of a theory, basically. Polyvagal theory is debunked. So anyway, so around that time that this was happening, I saw this picture of this long ribbon worm, but a unique type of worm that is it's not the kind of worm you find in your garden. This is a marine worm that's a highly predatory worm that will swim up to its prey, and if it gets close enough, it shoots this long, really long, very complex branching structure out of its forehead, which sticks onto its prey and stings it. It produces a toxin called tetrodotoxin, which is found in pufferfish too. So it emits this toxin out of a stylet. Now the stylet is like a tooth or something. It's a long nail-like it looks like a grain of rice almost. And it's pretty small in the Nemertean worm, but it grows relative to its size. And that's called the stylet. So at the very tip of the Nemertean proboscis, which is stored inside of the body, it has this calcium hard stylet that it just sits there in its head until it's ready to pounce and to shoot out and eat and kill. Now, if you observe the behavior through video of the Nemertean proboscis, it's very complex. It literally branches and follows, and it knows how to find the kink in the armor of its target, because the only way the stylet can inject toxin is through this stylet. And so it has to puncture the skin, inject toxin, and then it paralyzes its target. And once the target is paralyzed, then it wraps its mouth around the target and just consumes it. Similar to how a snake would eat an animal. It's very much like that. But this is a unique worm that it has a branching proboscis stored in its body with a calcium stylet positioned in its head, waiting for a target. Now, some people who study like animals have found that in certain reptiles which have vagus nerves, have a parietal eye, which is a vestigial structure which still remains and still crops up in their DNA occasionally. That's a hole in their forehead that doesn't seem to do much anymore, but it's there. And it's in exactly the same spot as where the Nemertean proboscis would have emerged had it continued to emerge physically out of the forehead of an animal. So I find that to be interesting. There's a neurological condition called cyclopia, which happens in 1 out of 100,000 births, and it's usually fatal, but the child will survive birth but die shortly thereafter because it's just such a horrifying disease. The condition of cyclopia is indicated by a proboscis emerging out of the forehead of a child. So a child, this is a rare genetic condition. So, you'd think maybe there's something in our genetics where we still are, if that genetic branch gets triggered, for some reason, a proboscis will come out of the forehead of a child. It's very disturbing. Don't look up pictures too much, but whatever. It's a real condition. And it's called cyclopia. It's also indicated by them also having a single eye in the very center of their face. So that's also interesting. Anyway, so I wondered, could there be a connection between the proboscis of the Nemertean worm and the human vagus nerve, given the location of it, the length, the branching, the length, literally how long the vagus nerve can grow in the human body. The vagus nerve is always referred to as the longest nerve in the human body. It's also the most complex branching nerve in the human body. It also is responsible for producing digestive juices to help you digest food. It's also responsible for your ability to breathe. It's also responsible for your ability to talk. It's also responsible for your immune system. And there's even ancient indications, right? So, like, I'm not opposed to looking at, like, what did people in the ancient world. Now, I didn't, like, Google, like, what did the ancients think about the vagus nerve? It's just these kinds of things are given to me through Twitter. People send me this stuff and they say, "Hey, what about this?" And I go, "Oh, shit." So I recently have been sent these pictures, I believe, of the god Shiva, um, or something. I'm not a Vedic myself, but anyway, it's this picture. I have it up on the screen. It's a human with a slit in their forehead, representing the third eye, but with a snake wrapped around their neck, with the head popping up. And there's always a crescent moon kind of indicated there, which is always interesting. And if you look at this ultra school picture, somebody also sent me that picture. That's a separate, different picture. There's multiple images representing the third eye lighting up with a snake uncoiling from the neck and seeming to have its own agency, essentially. So I always find that to be interesting. Now, Vedics were very into understanding how the human body worked and the energy feeling of how energy would flow through the body. And they indicated that there are multiple Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, these kinds of threads that go through the body and this kind of stuff. And yeah, but the vagus nerve typically is understood to stop once the vagus nerve goes into your skull through two branches meeting in the middle, but it's considered to have stopped, even though it grows massively first in the brain, and then it descends down the body, and it grows and branches and connects to every organ and plays critical roles in your body to function. Now, as a person who's worked with people with vagus nerve injuries from benzodiazepines or surgery or neck injuries or whiplash or whatever, I know the symptoms of a damaged vagus nerve, and they are always going to be slow digestion, bad mental health, bad memory, bad, like, decreased consciousness. So when the vagus nerve gets damaged, you notice that people have a decreased ability to speak properly. Their digestion sucks. Their heart rate is not controlled. It's not calm. It's not smooth. There's all kinds of things that happen if you just damage the vagus nerve. So it plays a critical role, of course. But even in these ancient Vedic practices, they indicate that the sushumna, the nadi, the ida, the pingala, branch from the very base of the body all the way up to the stomach, the heart, the throat, to the third eye. So there's indications there energetically that people are like, yeah, there's a connection. There's an energy channel that travels from my body up through my throat to my head to my forehead. So they can feel that there's this connection. And so, yeah, I mean, again, chakra points line up exactly with where the vagus nerve goes. So there's probably a connection. I'm not one to be like, yeah, like they were making it all up. They were just trolling us. They just were fucking around because they wanted to have a good time. And they're like, what if we write this stuff down so that people in 1,000 years will be like fooled by what we're talking about? I don't believe that that's what they were doing at all. And if you think that, I think you're kind of dumb. I think that they felt and experienced and believed in these connections in the body and to energy and how it flows through the body. I believe that. Um, let's take a look back at another interesting facet of the Nemertean worm is that it branches all the way through the body, but there's also a muscle called the retractor muscle. So the retractor muscle is a muscle that's specifically connected to the base of the Nemertean proboscis. That muscle can engage to pull the Nemertean proboscis back into the body. Now, in ancient Vedic traditions, one of the ways that they tell you to stimulate your vagus nerve is to engage your kind of your sphincter muscle, your some would call it like, I mean, there's Kegel exercises that women do. They're sort of refractory muscles. It's the same muscle that engages when you're like having an orgasm. So when you have an orgasm and you find that muscle that's spontaneously twitching, that is also a muscle in that same physical location that's doing that. Um, and there are a lot of connections between the vagus nerve and sexual function. For instance, people with a damaged vagus nerve lose sexual interest. They can't maintain an erection. They can't get aroused. So, yeah, vagus nerve damage absolutely directly affects your sexual function. Um, but also, there's the same muscle. There's a muscle that pulls on the vagus nerve, but also there's a muscle in the human body that automatically engages in orgasm. But you can also consciously control it too. So, you can kinda, like, still do that yourself. I'm not gonna tell you how, but there's a muscle that you can squeeze and retract and engage, down there. So there's some mental, not automatic connection to a muscle all the way down there that's not like moving your finger. Um, and when you do that, when you engage that muscle, guess what happens in a when you measure the vagus nerve? You activate the vagus nerve because it's indicated by a change in blood pressure, a change which is a vagus nerve controls your blood pressure very much. And then also is your heart rate will start to slow down slightly. It's a relaxing feeling. It's a calming, soothing feeling if you engage that and hold it. So people will do that in breathing practices and these kinds of things. So there's a seeming connection there between those two. I'm not saying that's a conclusive thing, and that's not why I wrote this, but the more I looked into it, I was like, "Oh my god. There at least are these anatomical connections and there's functional connections that you could make between the Nemertean proboscis and the human vagus nerve and other animals as well because I mean, what I'll say now is in Nemertean theory, we're basically proposing that there was a fish and it was a very rudimentary type of fish, but a type of animal swimming around that did not have a vagus nerve. And there was a Nemertean worm that was also floating around and they were attacking each other. The fish was trying to probably eat the worm, not knowing that what was waiting for it, which is a long branching poisonous proboscis that would sting the fish or try to crawl into its mouth and become a parasitic use a fish as a parasitic host, basically. So there's tons of videos of fish which have parasites latched onto their own tongue, and the fish just live with it. And it's not parasitic enough to kill the fish, but it's parasitic enough that the invasive species living inside of the fish can survive completely. I mean, anyway, it's already a gross topic, so I won't go into that too much, but there's evidence of these weird, I don't know, semi-mutually beneficial relationships in the animal world. There's also evidence of parallel gene transfer, not janine, but gene transfer. Mitochondria, for instance. Mitochondria wasn't originally in the cell. Mitochondria was a separate bug floating around, and a eukaryotic cell was like, "Ooh, I like it. It's producing ATP, pure energy. Let's suck it up and let's take its DNA. Let's like the mRNA." So yeah, I mean, there's these kinds of merging features in life all the time. I don't see why it would be that impossible for a proboscis to have encoded itself into the human body. And that's what we see as the vagus nerve today. And if that's true, then that does indicate that there's probably a lot to be learned in terms of the how do humans work, right? So, but one thing I will mention is I want to go into this stylet real quickly. So if you look at the anatomical placement of the stylet is at the tip of the proboscis, this branching proboscis. So the stylet is made out of calcium, and it's stored usually between the eyes or in the head, and it stays there and lays dormant until it's time to eject and shoot out of the forehead, out of the third eye of the proboscis of the Nemertean worm. Now, if this were something that had transferred over to a fish or to a fish before it had a vagus nerve, because it, again, taxonomy, luckily, there are species that do not have vagus nerves. So it's not just in all animals. And then there are just animals with a vagus nerve. And there's nothing in between. There's no like, oh, this fish just has a vagus nerve growing just halfway down. No, they're all exactly the same. The vagus nerve knows how to grow throughout the body. It does it every fucking time. Okay, sorry, excuse my language. I'm going to try not to swear because I'm live streaming everywhere, but this is pretty fascinating. So let's look at that stylet. Calcium stored in the head while it's waiting to emit. Pretty important. Probably has sensors in it that can guide where it's supposed to go as it's out of the body. Because once the proboscis is shot out of the forehead, the proboscis still has to navigate and circuitously find the target. It's once the proboscis is outside of the Nemertean worm, the Nemertean worm isn't using its eyes. It's not a wire-guided proboscis. The proboscis is doing its own thing. It's like a separate entity. The proboscis itself can detach from the Nemertean worm and still swim around. So it's got its own agency, and it's got this calcium thing on its head, right where it's the tip of its mind essentially. So curious, have you guys ever heard of the pineal gland? The pineal gland is this interesting feature of the human brain that just seems to be sitting in the very center of our head, stationed in the central location. It has a grain of rice shaped calcium crystal. It's connected down to the brainstem. It is also considered to be a light sensing device. There's lots of evidence showing that the pineal gland is responsive to, let's just say, energy, right? So again, when you talk about like, you go to Vedic practices or not even ancient, any non-traditional scientific analysis of the pineal gland would indicate that it's probably what gives us the like psychic ability or extrasensory perception or anything like that. A lot of people point to the pineal gland as being like pretty important, right? In science, it's like, oh, it makes you go to sleep. Oh, when the when the pineal gland is activated, it produces a hormone into your brain that makes you go sleepy time. And it's made out of calcium, and it's shaped still like a kind of a sharp-ended grain of rice, and it just sits there. Okay, interesting. And it sits right above the vagus nerve, and there's branches going to the place where the vagus nerve goes. So there's a connection, like there's a tangible connection there, to that object. So could it be possible that the pineal gland is a vestigial structure of the poisonous stylet of the Nemertean proboscis? This is the question I'm asking myself. And I mean, it's hard to say specifically. I think you'd need more genetic analysis to be able to say categorically that was the case. But again, you can see there's some corollaries where you'd be like, okay, well, where did the stylet go? If the vagus nerve is the proboscis of the Nemertean worm in the human body, then where did the stylet go? And I'm like, well, that's probably the pineal gland, actually. And so you can see even in like, I don't know, like this is a picture here drawn in like 1853, where it indicates a line of energy going up to the pineal gland, indicating how do you see? You have vision going to your pineal gland. That's a whole different ball of wax, but the retinal connection to the pineal gland is not what you think it is. It's very likely that in an altered state of consciousness that people are able to see with their eyes closed, and that would most likely be in some way, some energetic way that the pineal gland is able to still see through something at a deeper level. That could be pineal related. Now, the marine Nemertean worm is a hunter. It's a predatory worm that uses its proboscis in very dark conditions to be able to see in the dark. I mean, this is so far underwater, it's pitch black. So the Nemertean worm needs to be able to sense its environment in very particular ways, maybe quantum ways. It could be using some kind of a quantum information structure. Maybe it has to do with microtubules. There's something going on with the pineal gland, even in humans, that people are like obsessed with it. And the Nemertean proboscis stylet is an interesting connection, potentially. I will also mention that you remember, how does the Nemertean worm stun its prey? Because the Nemertean produces a toxin in the stylet that it injects into its target. And the subsequent symptom of this toxin is that the prey animal, the thing it's attacking, is paralyzed and it goes to sleep so that it can eat it whole. So when you think about the pineal gland, isn't it still doing something similar? When you go to sleep, it's producing melatonin right in your brain to make you go to sleep. So maybe this whole vagus nerve, pineal gland, fish brain relationship isn't as simple as we once thought it was. It's possible. It is actually possible. Now, how did I get here to this idea? Well, first, what I want to say is I do believe that, according to Nemertean theory, is that the vagus nerve itself is conscious. The vagus nerve maintained its consciousness throughout all these years, basically. So the vagus nerve itself is a descendant of the Nemertean worm, proboscis. And that the proboscis is its own form of intelligence. And I will just go up to this. I really want to point this out. This Vedic picture, which is also the profile picture of the Ultra School, is that picture of a blue light, which would indicate like ultraviolet light, which you typically see, again, ultraviolet, something you're not supposed to see normally, but in altered states of consciousness, you can see a blue light. So there's an indication from that. And this is coming from Vedic practices of like thousands and thousands and thousands of years old before they had like a pharmaceutical industry that wanted to get you hooked on disgusting drugs. But anyway, there are truths in the ancient world. We don't have to ignore them. And I think there's probably a lot to learn from that. But it's not an accident that there's blue skin, eyes are closed, but seeing through the third eye is possible, but indicated by a snake wrapping around the neck, emerging up and out. This is very likely an experience because there's certain times where people have very deeply scary experiences of the vagus nerve where they see it as a multi-headed snake emerging from their neck and speaking to them. And they can see with their eyes closed, or they can see while wearing a VR headset. There are reports of people wearing VR headsets doing a practice of Kundalini, and literally the video that's playing on their VR headset is no longer there, and they can see their hands. And there's no pass-through feature on the VR headset. So it's not like the camera got turned on or anything like that. This has no cameras on the outside. So if something in the brain is able to see through things, and typically you always hear like these are they're scary in a sense once they've happened, but while it's happening, you feel paralyzed. And there's a literal sensation and visual artifacts of a snake head coming out of your neck, wrapping around in front of you and looking you in the eyes, and then usually indicated by saying something to you in one of your ears. So that's not something that only Vedics have experienced. I can assure you of that. Anyway, going back to this pineal thing, or skipping past the pineal thing. So I believe that the vagus nerve is conscious, that the vagus nerve is probably a separate consciousness from you, the listener. Although I have to be mindful of that. Your vagus nerve does go to your ear. So your vagus nerve is listening to what you listen to. So it hears what you hear. Vagus nerve is kind of monitoring you all the time. Vagus nerve is probably the master regulator of consciousness in your body. And it's the one that's fully aware. Like, I think some people can relate. They have a sense of knowing, but they can't quite formulate what that is. That's probably your vagus nerve, that you're more in touch with your vagus nerve than you used to be, or that other people are. So, and it's very possible that the vagus nerve, because of its anatomical features, can sustain long-term coherent consciousness. And why is that? Why do I believe that? Or how could I know that? And that's really where I got to give credit to OR and Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose. Their theory of consciousness indicates that you typically find coherent long-term consciousness. We consider it human consciousness, but it exists in animals and plants, in places where you have very dense microtubules. Microtubules are like a breadcrumb of consciousness. Okay? That's not the only place where consciousness can be, but when you have tight groupings of microtubules together that last for a lifetime, you're going to be looking at something that is conscious. The vagus nerve is like 70% bundles of microtubules, highly protected by myelin sheath. Myelin sheath is what helps sustain ultraviolet superradiance in microtubules. So the vagus nerve is most likely some type of a highly conscious light hologram forming entity in our body that can be influenced and affected by things like, of course, drugs affect the vagus nerve. Ultrasound affects the vagus nerve. Light can affect the vagus nerve. Your thoughts can affect the vagus nerve. Your environment can affect your vagus nerve for either good or for bad. And if you see, like, honestly, just from a perspective of in my work teaching people about the vagus nerve and trying to help them help themselves and live a better life, Like maybe make a few incremental modifications to your life so you can be a little bit happier, a little bit more creative, a little bit more energized, a little bit more XYZ, is that teaching them about their vagus nerve and framing it. I've always framed it as, I'm not helping you, I'm helping your vagus nerve, and that your vagus nerve is its own thing. And you can consider it like a pet, kind of, but it's kind of like an internal helper if you let it help you. But some people, look, the thing is, a lot of people live their lives, one, never knowing this at all. And I think I it's cooler. It's certainly cooler. The second thing, though, is that if you look at Kundalini awakening, Kundalini is really where people become hyper aware of this internal consciousness that they have through the vagus nerve. And it can be terrifying. I mean, imagine waking up at the age of 35 or 60 or whatever age and realizing, oh my God, uh, so you're telling me that a majority of the decisions and things and thoughts and feelings that I've had weren't necessarily just coming from my prefrontal cortex, like from a few neurons firing in my head? Is that like some agency could be given to the vagus nerve inside of my body, like as if my body is alive? Like I have to treat my body like it's a living thing, and I have to feed it well and not give it toxic poison shit food. And is it too late for me to do anything now that I'm so sick, or is there hope? And the good news is that the vagus nerve can regenerate itself completely, 100%. The Nemertean proboscis, as it shoots out of the body and floats away and goes and does its work. I mean, I kind of think that's almost like a metaphor for dreaming. When you lay down and you sleep, your vagus nerve energetically floats into the ether and goes and has fun and then returns to your body when you wake up. Same thing with the Nemertean proboscis. It shoots out of the forehead, it floats out in the water, it goes and kills things, defends things, looks around, has fun, whatever. I mean, I haven't even covered like group dynamics of Nemertean worms. Apparently, Nemertean worm colonies under observation have some of the most complex social behavior of any marine species. Should give you some indication of probably, again, anytime you find more microtubules in a body, and the vagus nerve is certainly, and the proboscis packed full of microtubules, you find hyper consciousness, like levels of consciousness that are at a scale that's an order of magnitude or multiple orders of magnitude higher than the level below it. And it hits this, it's like, most people, we have evolutionary plateaus, and then we have, now we have a vagus nerve. That's Cambrian explosion territory. And that, okay, literally the moment where we're finding the evidence of this transfer of this kind of bumbling, dumb fish without a vagus nerve floating around trying to eat a worm, injecting this proboscis into its head, into its body, living in there as a parasitic relationship, is what spurred the Cambrian explosion. Like that is the moment where fish were like, I need to sprout arms and legs, breathe air, and build rockets to Mars. There seems to be some kind of an elevation aspect of this vagus nerve, of the proboscis, of these kinds of things. One other thing I'll add is that a lot of people who have stimulated just their vagus nerve usually get these almost downloads or some kind of a thought or an idea of like I've heard some cases where they develop this deep existential fear that they have to get off of this planet immediately. And I've had people DM me on Twitter. We're like, oh my God, did you get that same thing too? It was like, I had to get, like, I felt like I desperately needed to get off this planet. Like they were like urgently, like, I have to get off the planet right now. Like, and I'm like, where would the fuck would that come from? Right. And these only happen when people are doing practices or drugs or things that stimulate microtubules heavily located in their vagus nerve. So there's a lot of very interesting threads through this whole theory that are just hard to believe, but, um, I know it'll take people time to get it or to understand it or to even see it in any way. It's not immediately apparent to you. One thing I would encourage everybody listening to do the next time you're speaking, given that the vagus nerve is what is gives you the ability to speak, is I want you to think of what the next word is that you're going to say. If you're deep in conversation or you're giving a talk like I am right now, I want you to think, because you are your brain, right? You are your brain, right? Like every thought that you have is coming from your brain in your skull. Isn't that right? Isn't that what you've all been told? Well, then clearly you should be able to know what the word you're going to say next is. You should know what sentences you're going to say for the next 5 minutes. You should have some planning there. But just try speaking for long enough and go, what am I going to say next? I have no idea. But the vagus nerve knows. The vagus nerve is planning ahead significantly. The amount of computing power in a microtubule in the vagus nerve is phenomenal. And that's what Orkawar, as a theory of consciousness, general consciousness, especially in humans and microtubules, the vagus nerve is packed full of microtubules. There's probably, I haven't done exact calculations, but there's longer microtubules that are with you for your entire life in your vagus nerve than there are in your brain. They're longer, and longer is better. Like, you don't like, evolutionarily, you'd want to extend the length of your microtubules because it gives you more quantum computing power. And so the vagus nerve is just this long ass continuous branch, non-broken, highly packed. I mean, the vagus nerve is also massive. If you've ever taken apart a piano, or if you've ever seen a piano, like a Steinway grand piano with the top open, and you look at those big strings, those big thick strings or strings on a bass guitar, that's the thickness of your vagus nerve in your neck. And that's packed with microtubules that are 25 nanometers across. 25 nanometers. You can't see it with your naked eye. And just the amount of microtubules in your vagus nerve is freaking incredible. And anyway, so this is where we can get the idea and really validation. I mean, there's too much validation at this point in time indicating that where you find microtubules, you find consciousness. Where do you find the most microtubules in the human body that are continuous and sustained throughout your entire life and contribute to important functions and have spiritual, psychological implications in therapy and health and extrasensory perception or psychokinetic abilities? Like, what do people always say about the third eye? It allows you to peer into space-time geometry, pierce the veil, do all these kinds of things. It's the freaking vagus nerve. So this is really elevating the vagus nerve to this like place. It's putting it, I don't want to say putting it on a pedestal, but it's pretty darn important. And I think one of the issues that I hope to not contribute to anymore is framing the vagus nerve as just something that you only need to learn about when you're sick. Because that's really what it has been for the whole time I've been in it, which is, oh, you're sad, you have trauma, there's something wrong in your life. Now is the time to start associating with the vagus nerve. And while that's true, that is true. Like if you are sick or you're depressed or you're not, you just know something's not right, you don't feel good, something's wrong in your body, go look at your vagus nerve before you go get on pills. Trust me. Doctors are not going to understand what the hell the vagus nerve really is at all, right? So yeah, so basically I don't want the vagus nerve to only be something that's considered when you're really dead, like almost about to die. But I'm not saying I don't want it associated with that, because if it were like it, even the vagus nerve in a hospital setting is heavily considered when you're about to die. So let's take like one of the big, like, weirdest ways to die, which is a sepsis infection or a cytokine storm. Okay. We all know from COVID, we know about cytokine storms. Your body just suddenly starts producing its own killer cells and it attacks your own cells and you die. Guess what? If you stimulate the vagus nerve, the cytokine storm stops in its tracks and you survive and you don't die. Pretty important, wouldn't you say? I mean, that's like one of the key concerns in a hospital is that you don't develop a sepsis, cytokine storm, and die. And what are some of the things that they do? They try to give you, of course, give you antibiotics. But one of the things they did during COVID was they stimulated the spleen with ultrasound to stimulate the vagus nerve fibers going to the spleen. And guess what? People were like deathly ill, about to die in a day, walked out of the hospital 2 days later. So by stimulating the vagus nerve with ultrasound, for instance. So yeah, of course, if you're about to die, consider the vagus nerve. Please do yourself a favor. I don't want anybody to die here, right? Or I want no death at all on the planet, right? None of you are allowed to die, okay? New rule, right? That's the don't die thing. And but also I don't think it should like be relegated to that though. Like you would be losing out on so much of like, okay, you have evolutionary origins dating back 500 million years plus. I mean, microtubules have been around for a long time. So you have a connection to microtubule consciousness, microtubule effects, microtubule geometry, all this kind of stuff, and whatever it accesses, which is an opening within Nemertean theory, right? So you'll notice, like, I'm mentioning Orko-War. Nemertean theory is built from within that framework of what Orko-War did for us. I'm not stupid to go, I can come up with a better theory of consciousness, which every Yahoo wacko whack job on the internet apparently thinks they want to do. How many theories of consciousness are there? Oh, there's unified field consciousness theory. There's a theory of everything. There's world quantum, world theory thing, consciousness. It's like, okay, guys, the theory of consciousness that makes the most sense, has the most testing, is the most actually verifiable, is orchestrated objective reduction, OR, which is from Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose. Just accept it. Move on. Like, I'm not interested in debating with some, oh, well, if you have enough neurons in one area, then you have consciousness. It's like, no, that's IIT. That's debunked too. That's bullshit. So this is not a new theory of consciousness. This is a building upon Orko-War theory that microtubules within them are sustainers of the force of consciousness, and that the vagus nerve is the biggest single bundle of these coherent microtubules in the whole body. Highly protected, obviously really important. And I'm saying that there's consciousness there, that the vagus nerve isn't just some dumb conduit of information from your gut up to your brain. Okay? Which is what every other person right now is saying. Every person trying to treat you for anything is basically making the assumption that, oh yeah, your vagus nerve, you don't want to cut it, but it's just like this copper wire. No, I'm saying it has its own agency. It has its own memories, its own thoughts, feelings, desires that can be separate from your thoughts, feelings, and desires. So there's an interplay between the two. Sometimes what your vagus nerve wants isn't what you want. But what I can tell you is if you find a way to align your vagus nerve's desires and thoughts and feelings and needs and values with your own fish brain, lobe brain, your technically more ancient brain, your dumb brain, your thinking brain. Oh, I'm thinking about it. Your vagus nerve is the thing that knows. It's the thing that's accessing like space-time geometry. It's the thing that's probably communicating with God, if I'm being honest with you. It's more likely that your vagus nerve is what gives you God consciousness than your brain for the most part. And any microtubules found in your brain are there to be able to resonate to your vagus nerve, which is interesting because if you look at the Nemertean worm, it has a brain. It has an old lobed brain, but guess the shape that the lobe brain takes? It's called a spiralian worm because the brain literally grew in a perfect circle all around around the Nemertean proboscis. The brain of the Nemertean worm grew perfectly in circumference to the Nemertean proboscis, like a circle portal, as if it's trying to read what's going on in the Nemertean proboscis. Interesting. So maybe your brain is more just trying to access your vagus nerve than your vagus nerve is trying to access your brain. And then I will also say that there is compelling evidence that your memory is actually from your vagus nerve because they've done studies where they can use optogenetics to stimulate regions of your insular cortex which have memory cells, and they can trigger an entire cascade of mental, emotional, feeling trauma that's immediately correlated with an immune response. So your immune system goes into full overdrive. If you were ill with some really bad illness 4 years ago and you find yourself constantly sort of getting sick again and again and again, even though the presence of the actual illness is gone, just the memory of it will re-trigger it. Your brain remembers it like a holographic fractal memory, like a little chip that you insert and it goes, it projects a reality in your body and your body responds as if it's real based on just the memory of it. So there's a role for memory, consciousness, the vagus nerve. There's so much. I mean, there's so much in this interpretation of what I've seen over the years. And this isn't, again, I'm not a nobody. I've been doing this for a long time. I actually do have the expertise to be able to make this claim. And I'm making it. So, yeah, the vagus nerve is conscious. It's the descendant of the Nemertean proboscis worm. This branching proboscis thing that shoots out of the third eye forehead of a Nemertean worm is the evolutionary precursor of the human vagus nerve. The stylet, the calcium stylet of the proboscis is what is now known as the human pineal gland. It provides us with some incredible, probably pretty important aspects of experiencing the world and consciousness that are phenomenal. And that, yeah, go humans, I guess, is also part of it. But yeah, again, I won't go into like every single thing related to this because you can all see there's a branching, there's a direction that this can go in all kinds of ways, of course. But uh, I'm completely willing to put my entire reputation on the line. If you want to go and peer review this theory as a scientist or as a member of the public or whatever, I will be posting the link to Research Hub. So you do technically have to be a published author to be able to review as a peer because I'm a published author. I'm a scientific researcher, but certainly I know we have some in the audience who can do that. So I would very much like to, yeah, engage on some of these topics, but this is just, okay, look, too compelling to not explore. And I haven't even gotten into the genetic analysis of the proboscis proving that it has exact matches with the vagus nerve. That's a whole different, I'm going to have to even do a whole nother paper just diving into the data that I've had. This is a fraction, a hair's width of what I have in terms of validating this theory. And I swear to God, every time I look at this and every time I think about this, I almost am like, what the actual heck? this is the craziest thing that I've ever seen. This is bizarre and weird. So, yeah, anybody who's, like, thinking in the back of the mind, like, this guy's gone off the deep end or this guy's crazy or something like that, I can assure you I'm perfectly normal, sane. I live a r I think a pretty I actually think a pretty boring life, pretty normal, boring, standard life. I'm not, not in and out of the loony bin. I'm not, not live streaming to you from a mental ward or anything like that. I'm sitting here in my home, in my office, in front of my computer, live streaming to you right now. So, I really do think there's something to this. I would say, if anything, from a falsification, perspective, I would love to see more genetic analysis of the proboscis and the human vagus nerve. I think that that's a really interesting pathway. But, for everybody watching, like, it's a wild ride. And what I can also tell you is that, I'm gonna be building on this theory probably for the rest of my life. This is gonna be my theory of how the vagus nerve works based on 7 years of work on it, but also based on, I'd say, 12, 13 years of working in ultrasound neuromodulation, studying microtubules, working with Dr. Stuart Hamroff, studying consciousness, and, also just being a human being who observes the world and goes, "Oh, wow. It's interesting watching human behavior." Like, one of the things, so if we go back to kinda like, polyvagal theory, one of the things that it tried to do was say, oh, I think I have that picture here too. Um, I'm just gonna pull that up here on my computer. It was just a picture of in polyvagal theory. Like, what does polyvagal theory specifically try to say um, about the body? So here's a polyvagal chart. So what polyvagal theory is trying to say is that when your dorsal vagal thing is aroused, you go into life threat. I think all of this like, you're not gonna be disadvantaged learning about what fight or flight versus freeze response is, but the way that it's framed, I think needs to be rethought. So, somebody out there, entrepreneurial soul out there could probably better develop a frame for how this all works in a Nemertean context, given that there isn't a difference between dorsal and ventral. And that it's one thing. And I would just say, like, there's a state of feeling good in your vagus nerve, and there's a state of feeling bad in your vagus nerve. And there's a reason that animals freeze, but it's not because they're one branch. I mean, I think polyvagal theory is very materialist and give any does not grant any agency to the vagus nerve itself, which I think is totally wrong, completely wrong. Besides the fact that, anatomically speaking, polyvagal just cannot survive. Polyvagal theory cannot survive this point. Secondarily to that, and I think actually really primarily, which is I have a sense of injustice for humans, is that we are looked at as these routine mechanical machines that the drug industry wants to pump full of drugs and social media sites want to dictate our next thought, and that there's no agency there. I mean, literally, here's the thing. I've in working in Orkawar and talking about consciousness and these concepts, I have myself received so much pushback. Stuart Hamroff has received 100,000 times the amount of pushback to simply say that humans are conscious and that we have agency and free will. Like, if this were 1,000 years ago, Stuart Hamroff would have been stoned to death for saying what he's saying, basically. It seems like it. Like, if academics had their way, they would have hauled his ass on a pike and burnt a fire around him. This is heretical statements that you are a conscious quantum computer, that you have free will, that you're connected to God in some way or source or something like that through these microtubules, most likely, that these are like very critical things for all life, that there's some deeper universal connection between all of us, that you have more powers than you think, that even if you're in this, what's called like a rock and a hard place, is that you never know what kind of things that can spring forth from your own mind that are divine. Now, imagine the environment we're in right now where people are going to jail for stupid, stupid shit, not actual crimes, just posting stuff on the internet or whatever, thought crimes. Um, this is the world we live in today, is going to deny you agency, is going to try to deny you consciousness, to deny you free will itself, to claim that you are a determined golem. This is, this could get me in trouble, but some of the biggest academics right now, their whole thing is that humans are this determined mechanical machine and that we have no agency. And every time you think you're making a decision, a computer could have done that. An AI could have done it better. Some AI can definitely do some things better, but it can't do what humans do. AI cannot do what a human can do. AIs do not have microtubules, and AIs do not have consciousness. They're doing a type of mechanistic work, which is valuable, of course. Like dominoes falling. Yes, that's one thing after the other. It's a logic thing, and can you get things done that way? Of course. But a lot of human history comes from springing forth the power of something greater than just what's in our body or what's in our head at this time. So yeah, I mean, I really do believe that every human being within them contains this potential connection to something infinite, literally infinite. The thing that all religions, all spiritual traditions have talked about, that these are real things and you're not just making it up. You're not just crazy, or you're not just hallucinating things, that there are real incredible things going on in the world and in your mind, and you can utilize these insights and some of these powers to like heal yourself, to live the kind of life you want. There's a lot connected to these theories. This gives groundwork for people in all kinds of fields to be expansive and not to see themselves as limited, not to see themselves as some mechanistic pill chewing machine, because that's what you are seen as in the market. You are seen as a some kind of a liking machine that likes posts on the internet. You're seen as a content consumption body, a vessel, a golem. There's ancient teachings on golem, men of clay, NPCs. These are the ideas that are threatened the most by Nemertean theory. So if you're an expansive, tuned in, amazing, limitless human consciousness, then this theory is for you. This is your theory. It's our theory. It's the human theory. It's like we humans are the pinnacle of the development of microtubules. Humans are. And because of how we've used it. And yes, there's in evolutionary terms, there's definitely, I don't know if again, I can't say if it was all luck or randomness or guidance or agency. I definitely believe that the vagus nerve has been driving a lot of human development for a long time. It's clear that that's been happening. So it's been kind of working in the background and taking a back seat and kind of, guiding guiding us. And right now, where people are becoming more and more addicted to food and drugs and these kinds of things, maybe we could acknowledge that, when people start stimulating their vagus nerve with ultrasound, for instance, and they start waking their vagus nerve back up, because I think our culture tries to, I would argue that there are people who are listening to this going, "Oh shit, he knows. Shut it down. This is not good." Right? Because I'm making people aware of a truth. I'm making people aware of a deep, deep, ancient truth that's real, that you can go validate yourself. All this stuff that I'm talking about, I'm not claiming some divine source of this knowledge. This is all stuff that I've been able to research through the internet, through hopefully Google for some time. Um, but yeah, these are all things, and these are real worms that you can go get on any beach in any part of the world, basically. They're a bright red color. They're usually about from 3 inches long to 3 feet long. They can grow to 177 feet long. So I wonder what knowledge they carry in that proboscis. They live a long time too. So anyway, there's implications for this in terms of, human language. When humans are, this is another key piece of the Nemertean theory I do want to cover, which is the human voice is one of the biggest indicators of advanced human consciousness, right? Because I notice we're having longer conversations. People have podcasts. We're talking. We're communicating. We're spreading ideas. Some ideas are meant to help. Some ideas can hurt. There are ideas and thoughts and language patterns that can deeply hurt people and paralyze people and stun them and put them into a trance. And what's the best thing to do as a predatory agent to a subject that is in a trance is to energetically consume them. So the fact of the matter is that all humans have a Nemertean capability. There are good Nemertean usages and there are evil uses. And I want you to start thinking in terms of this very delineated line. When you see people on the TV, when you see people on social media, when you see people in your environment, people that are talking to you, start understanding that those who are most tuned in, the people who are most, aggressive about living, some of them are out there to do exactly what the Nemertean proboscis is trying to do. Some of them are out there to use the natural extension of the vagus nerve, which is the voice. So I'm not so off. I'm not like anti polyvagal theory here in that sense, which is that one of the biggest indicators of success for polyvagal theory was teaching therapists that how you speak is going to affect the vagus nerve of the patient. That might seem like a very simple thing, but getting that into the public consciousness through therapy was very good. So I like that. But their message is, I don't think it goes maybe not far enough, which is that it also plays a role in the other side too, which is that people use their voice, people who are inherently like not tuned in, very egotistical or narcissistic or whatever you might call it, or traumatized. Most likely, people who are highly traumatized are in attack mode with their proboscis and are thinking that I'm going to energetically consume the next person, the next person, the next person. And they do it. They make a career out of it or not, whatever. But there are definitely people out there. Every single one of you listening is like, oh my God, I totally know somebody who's like that. They're just like, they have barbs coming out of their mouth. Barbs coming out of their mouth, stinging, stunning, putting people into a trance, just so that they can almost sit there and eat off of their energy. They can consume their energy, put negative thoughts into their head, make them feel bad, make them feel like they're a slave consciousness. People do this shit all the time. This is, this is one of the unfortunate realities of life. But if you understand Nemertean theory, you can be free from that, potentially. I mean, obviously, you have to be proactive and you got to put in work. Just knowing that this exists at all and understanding that, like, maybe, you know, maybe the person who's being mean to you, maybe the aggressor in a relationship, maybe it's not really them. Like, it's not their ancestral fish brain that's being the asshole. Maybe it's actually their vagus nerve, which is deeply hurt and lashing out through the voice because it thinks that it, by consuming the energy of another human, that it'll make itself stronger. And again, if you this is a life thing. I mean, if you put animals in captivity for long enough and you harm them, they just naturally lash out and they're violent. These kinds of things happen. Oops. Sorry, I just got a phone call in, but I'm not gonna take it. But yeah, I mean, I would more often try to see an aggressor as someone who might not be fully tuned in to the nature of their voice, to the nature of their vagus nerve, to what is really controlling them. So it's like there are multiple consciousnesses in a human. I think there's lots of agreement in that these days. There's certainly you can go and look at like multiple personality disorder studies, people who clearly are shifting into a different kind of consciousness and shape shifting and shape forming into a different person. The vagus nerve typically in its representations is usually a multi-headed type of entity, meaning it's like got multiple different personalities. I mean, and if it could channel something from the ether, something from this deeper rooted quantum informational consciousness world where like that's where all the all the aliens and all the mantis consciousnesses are hanging out and playing around. Your vagus nerve is probably the way that these energies are able to flow through you. When I see people who are like, "Oh, I'm channeling somebody," I immediately go, "Oh, that's bullshit." I totally do think that that's like there's no way to be sure of any of that stuff. I mean, I'm like highly skeptical. I'm really, really skeptical. I mean, it might not seem like it, given that I'm like talking about like the third eye and chakras. I'm extremely, extremely skeptical of a lot of stuff that I hear. And I'm the kind of guy who's like, I have to have seen it to believe it. Like I have to have like actually like, okay, if it's possible to do in a human body, you should be able to tell me step by step, what did you do to make that happen? How did you see the blue light coming out of your chest, for instance? Like, how did that happen? Okay, well, what are the ingredients? I'm going to go buy it and try it. And if it works for me, then now I can believe that there's something there. Otherwise, I'm not going to take it at face value. Never. That's a terrible idea. So I'm extremely skeptical, but even at the same time, I'm like, there are things that even I've seen where I'm like, damn, the scientific, this like materialistic scientific method of like a chair and the floor and atoms and like just the material world and there's no God or anything like that, or that there's no possible way that there's anything like a God or spirits or anything like that. These people are just hallucinating. Those like strict materialist scientists, I think they're crazier than people who are talking about the third eye and chakras. Like straight up, quote me on that. Because these are real experiences that are very getting. Here's the cool thing too is as I work in the ultrasound field and I work in neuromodulation, it's getting more and more easy and accessible to just press a button and stimulate psychic effects or psychic abilities or to see blue light radiating out of your chest, to see blue light around you like an aura or something like that. These technologies are coming that are gonna validate for millions in a very rapid period of time that we live in a world that's much stranger than you thought. It's not just white picket fence, suburbia, hot dogs on the weekend territory we're entering into in the next 10 years. It's gonna become very weird and very, I would say, spiritual. But even then, I don't even think it's gonna be spiritual because we're using, I mean, we're talking about like hardcore medical technology, like biotechnology being repurposed to induce altered states of spirituality. I don't even think we can, I don't even know if we can start saying that it's, oh, this is science in this basket and this is spirituality in this other basket. I think that the baskets have no bottoms and that they merge at some point in the very middle, below the basket. They're one and the same essentially. One formulates it through mathematics and another formulates it through music or singing or yoga or whatever, or art or speaking or creativity or thinking or conversation or just playing or having a family or doing whatever the hell you do. It's all really in the same thing. It's all in the same family. Like dancing is an expression of mathematics, of geometry. Um, when you have feelings, even according to like Orkawar, when you have feelings, when you have a feeling, it's happening in the microtubules, and it's because you made your microtubules made a micro decision between one branch of space-time and the other. There's like an objective reduction, and every time that this waveform makes a little pop collapse, like these little effervescent bubbles, like carbonated drink, they're like popping, 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 popping. And this is happening all over in your microtubules, like all at once, synchronized in like these big spiral helical patterns. Is that every time that like that happens and you like look at something and you collect, like your vision, your observer effect looks at something and it like sees it and you experience it, like you see a picture that's beautiful, or you see you see your children playing or something like that and just being happy, and you feel extremely grateful in that moment, is that you're actually doing like a quantum level download into the deep space-time Planck scale geometry of the universe, and doing like you're processing something that the universe wants you to process in feeling emotion. Like you are an agent of the universal God mind or of consciousness of source in a physical body, and that the connection we have is through consciousness. Consciousness is like this connecting layer between the weird paradox, like quantum world is weirdly always paradoxical. So you can't live in quantum. Like people who take DMT and see like weird fractal geometry and stuff like that. Like in our physical world, like I can't be high on DMT all the time. Like trust me. I'm not saying that I've tried, but I have dabbled once, and I'm like, okay, I can, like there's fractals everywhere, and I can't even see it in my own eyes, and I'm seeing like weird eigenvalue rotating tesseract shapes, and okay, I'm seeing all this, but how do I go to the store and buy bananas? It's not gonna, those are not compatible. So, but there's a way to see into the quantum, and there's a way to see into the classical. Like, now I'm looking outside and I see on the screen, I see this yellow and blue and these circles, and I can make pattern detection and understand what I'm looking at and have context. That's all happening in classical world. So there's like classical world in your brain and neurons and stuff like that, but the microtubules are what gives you access to like that deeper quantum space-time Planck scale weirdness, like where you're, and that's probably why humans, when they're really tuned in, experience like premonition, time, like a sense of knowing the future or having a sense of the future. It's probably because the space-time geometry in the quantum world is like sending information backwards, basically. So events that happen in the future tend to like collapse the waveform and shoot information backwards and forward through time. And consciousness is what collects it. Consciousness is like a net that collects, these collapsing waveform patterns. But anyway, when you feel things and you feel it in your vagus nerve, you feel it in your body. When you have that gut feeling about something, or you have butterflies in your stomach because somebody you like is, I'm attracted to this person. I feel butterflies in my stomach. That's your vagus nerve or all around your whole stomach area. Your vagus nerve is just, your microtubules in your vagus nerve are buzzing, just like that. And there's a feeling to it because you're doing weird types of math, almost like you're doing a knowing type of math. It's not even called computation. It's called non-computational processing. So some very weird stuff. And then another one is, I know when people get upset or sad or frightened, they always report that it's difficult for them to speak, and they get a frog in their throat. They go, "Oh, it's like I can't speak. It's like my voice is constricted. Like something's not letting me talk." Guess what nerve controls the constriction in your throat? Raise of hands. Hands up if you can guess what important nerve in your body controls the muscles in your throat that cramps down and prevents you from speaking. If you said the vagus nerve, you ding ding ding, you win. So the vagus nerve is doing a lot on your behalf that you don't control, and the vagus nerve is knowing more than you know. Most likely. I think the vagus nerve is way more tuned into things than you are. And when I say you means your fish brain, your lobed brain, the left and right hemispheres of your brain. That's your fish brain, because that would have existed before the Nemertean proboscis entered into the fish. And actually, so I've been saying this for a few months as I've been formulating this. I'm like, is that really what happened? And recently I got to meet a gentleman who is a Vedic historian. He studies Vedic philosophy. Like it's kind of his religion almost. Like he's a practicing Vedic in the modern age, right? Very cool guy. And I was telling him this, and he said, "Oh my God, in the Vedic texts, the first entry of consciousness was into a fish." I was like, what? Weird. So these Vedics, they were saying things, and again, a lot of people, I'm sure people are out there being like, oh, he's just repurposing Vedic philosophy to a modern audience. I have no idea. I don't know basically anything about anything Vedic at all, other than like a few couple things. I'm not a Vedic. I don't practice a religion. Was raised like non-religious. So all these people were like, "Oh my God, this is exactly like what blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, I have no reference for it. So it's really strange to hear these things. So I've just at this point gotten really used to, okay, I'm going to talk about these things. These things are going to happen, and yada, yada, yada. Right. So I just assume now that people are going to start sending me things and going, "Oh my God, this is like what you were saying with Nemertean theory." And whoa, like I'm seeing it. Holy cow. I'm having these like huge revelations and blah, 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 blah. I almost at this point totally expect that's already been happening, and I expect that to continue to happen. But so for me, probably my direction that I'm going to take now, since I certainly am happy that I get to cover microtubules within the vagus nerve, which is my work is really, I don't even know. What is my work? Ultrasound, obviously. Ultrasound represents the vast majority of my work. Stimulating the vagus nerve with ultrasound, obviously a key part of that, but not limited to just ultrasound. One of the things we're currently exploring in kind of the ORCOR world is anesthesia and its effects on microtubules, namely in my interest is in the vagus nerve, and xenon as an anesthesia agent and for fun is a very interesting area. So I have some working groups right now that I'm doing like engineering development on to see if there's a way to get like more people to get access to like xenon therapy. Because honestly, out of all the times that I've done talking to people, people reach out to me like, oh, they're like, oh, I'm having this, I think I'm like stuck on this trauma, or I have this memory of this bad event, or I just can't get movement here in this part of my memory or my body or my mind. Can you help me and like talk me through it? And like, usually I'm successful at that because of this framework. Like Nemertean theory really is sort of what I've been doing for like the last 7 years already. Just to be clear, I've already been doing Nemertean theory. This is what I held in my back of my head the whole time. But I'm like, there's no way. But not the Nemertean like worm. I only recently learned about the worm part. But these ideas that the vagus nerve is actually conscious and that it has microtubules. I've known about microtubules and Orcoar since 2006 when I learned it when I was like 16 years old or something like that. So I've known about the like potential for microtubules and consciousness for a long time. And then, immediately when I started studying like ultrasound on microtubules, I knew that was a relationship. And then, of course, I got to stimulate my vagus nerve with ultrasound and had this phenomenal, almost religious type of experience with it. And immediately I considered the ultrasound was stimulating the microtubules in my vagus nerve because I did it right on my neck this time. And if you want to go see more on that, I think ultraschool.com is the place to go peek at that. But again, ultraschool is very much for like the very esoteric stuff. So only if you're like, I want to hit new highs of consciousness. I want to explore what these chakra things are. I want to learn as much as there is to know about microtubules and all this kind of stuff. Then that's like ultraschool. But anyway, yeah, we do, what do I say? We do guidance on xenon therapy in the ultraschool as well. Since xenon is also a very good tool for stimulating microtubules and learning more about this. Like, again, because it'd be unfair for me to be like, I'm this hotshot skeptic. Like, I don't believe everything that people tell me. And then I have these experiences with xenon and I go, oh man, it would be unfair for me to just pretend I have didn't use xenon and see purple lights coming out of my chest or something like that. So, anyway, so yeah, ultraschool is very esoteric. I'll tell you that. Only join that if you're ready to the kind of stuff we do is like on par with like remote viewing, astral projection, expanding consciousness, that kind of stuff. But it's cool, it's fun. We've got a growing community there. But anyway, that's not why I'm here. But I, definitely want to present this fuller theory as far as Nemertean theory goes, is that it's really a drop-in replacement for polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory, as I said 2 years ago on the Paul Grossman news, was basically as good as debunked. So this chart does need to get probably maybe remade. I think there's some things from polyvagal theory that should continue. But I think saying, again, when you hear people going, oh, it's dorsal vagal, or no, that's ventral vagal, that's bullshit. That's factually bullshit. There's no dorsal vagal, ventral vagal split. And that's been shown by Paul Grossman, by people with labs that can probe the vagus nerve. So, again, if you're going to look, I'm just as susceptible to another kid. How long was it? That's 30 years basically too. So by the way, 1994 is when polyvagal theory was published. It took 30 years for someone like me to come around and say, oh yeah, this is actually bullshit and we gotta rethink it. Nemertean theory is just as open to that type of thing happening in its lifetime as well. That's the nature of a theory. I mean, you're basically saying like, this is what I think the vagus nerve is, and this is what I think it's doing, and test it. If happy to have a conversation about it, but it's not as simple. I don't know. It's simpler, but it's not as simple as polyvagal. There's some good things in polyvagal, and there's some things that are just, again. And lastly, what I'll say is polyvagal theory got a big leg up because it claimed to have, we have this scientific proof of the dorsal ventral split, and this is why it should be used in therapy. So they got a 30-year leg up from that. And I was like, okay, well, could we develop a theory of the vagus nerve that is actually more scientifically sound than polyvagal theory? And I think, yeah, that's what Nemertean theory represents. Oh, and then lastly, for those wondering, what does Nemertean mean? Nemertean is the name given to the Nemertean worm, obviously, this one here. And I think it came from like 1863. So the year 1863. The guy who found them in his fishing net was studying them. And he said, it seems like this proboscis never misses. It just always knows how to get to its target. Always. It never missed. Like it's a highly adept thing. So one of the ancient Greek tales on the nymphs of the sea, I think daughters of Poseidon. There are 50 daughters of Poseidon, and one of them was called Nereid, Nereid, or Nemertia. And so that was the name given to the Nemertean worm as a kind of a throwback to Greek mythology. So really it does acknowledge that in my work as well, is that the vagus nerve, I think, is more developed in the fairer sex, in females, than in men. I will also say that. I'm not making any political claims here. I'm just observing that in my work, it always did seem like women were more tuned in to their vagus nerve by default than men were. Men are more of the lobed fish brain thinkers, which does contribute to like reasoning and logic and like step by step kind of stuff. But it's the vagus nerve which drops you out of the thinking into the knowing. Like, so you can't have one or the other. You do need both. So I hope there's a reconciliation between, men and women, and understanding like our deeper nature, our deeper purpose, our abilities and lack thereof, and different specializations. But also I will say one thing to validate that is, so take for instance, what happens if you, this is kind of dark, but what happens if you become a quadriplegic or paraplegic? So if you're in an accident or an injury and your spinal cord gets damaged or severed, okay? In men, they lose the ability to sexually reproduce and have, well, I mean, I guess they could do in vitro fertilization or something like that, but you get my point. Men, the things down there don't work. So if you like, paraplegia down there, no worky. You have to like inject drugs and stuff like that to make it work. There's no conscious control. But women can still orgasm even if they're paraplegic or quadriplegic. And the only reason is because the vagus nerve persists. So there's definitely some deeper connection in women in the vagus nerve throughout the body that men don't have. So that's a factual statement. So anyway, and yeah, I've also found that women probably benefit more from vagus nerve practices from if they're having a health problem. But for men who are like already, I would say, already healthy, that want to explore higher states of consciousness, like Kundalini awareness, that's also something to be explored. I think there's definitely room, and I really like, again, I did for 7 years just focused on like, okay, you're sick, something's wrong, vagus nerve. But geez, I mean, all the while I was doing that, I was doing Kundalini practices all the time as a healthy young man, um, so that I could run that work successfully. And so I'm like, I should probably be fair and make sure that there's other people out there who like want to do good things in the world could also have like access to some of the knowledge that I've developed and some of the tools and techniques that I've developed to do to stimulate my vagus nerve and to get the kind of results that I've gotten. Because I would absolutely say that my success in life, and I have multiple things I could point to and awards and like, uh, cool stuff that happens in my life. And I'm like very blessed and very lucky and very grateful. And I'm a very just sometimes I go, how is this even happening? This is just so unreal. My life is just like a movie sometimes. But um I've been doing vagus nerve practices since like 2016, 2017, pretty consistently. And I can only really point like, what was the main thing that changed direction in my life was the incorporation of ultrasound vagus nerve stimulation. Ultrasound vagus nerve stimulation. Once I did that as a practice, that's when that is what felt like another part of me awoke and started guiding me in ways that do not make any logical sense. Like, oh, you need to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico here. There's no reason why. That happened to be the genesis of a huge ultrasound project that I was involved in. Like, but these are like intuitive hits, and so these are just like these gut punches. Like, oh, okay, I have to do this or say this or be somewhere or take this action, and I'm like, there is a sense that either I'm communicating with myself from the future or that there's something playing a deeper, grander, more connected role in my life than I can even see. And I get that sense. I know that's true. I know factually that's true. And I do believe that the vagus nerve is that conduit for that to happen. And I can't say categorically is it the vagus nerve that knows? I mean, obviously it's the vagus nerve clearly is this its own intelligent thing. I just consider it like this snake-like intelligence that's very clever and branching. Like the branching nature of the proboscis, I would say represents your ability to think through multiple simultaneous pathways to arrive at the most optimal solution, which is something that a computer can't do. But a quantum computer, a quantum system, can consider multiple branching possibilities and send back from the future which one was the right path to take. That's a quantum process. And if you think about how people have those gut feelings of like, oh, should I go down this alley or this alley? I heard a video yesterday that when soldiers were getting back from Iraq and Afghanistan, is that they analyzed which decisions were made to not go down that specific pathway versus the other, and that there was like an 80% success rate in avoiding like what ended up being like an explosive device down the alleyway. And they all reported they just had this gut feeling not to go down that way. And it could be that like some of these potentials, these explorations, they're picking up something, or they might even be, I don't know, seeing into the future or different. I'm not a big fan of multiple worlds hypothesis, but I think there's some, I don't know. So there are still unknowns. Anybody who's coming to you and claiming I know all is totally full of themselves. Run away, please. That's how you get a cult. Okay, I'm not trying to run a cult here, and I'm not trying to be Osho telling you I know the secrets of the universe or anything like that. There are still questions in my mind of, is it information coming back from the future? Are there multiple worlds? I'm more inclined to follow the Orkawar interpretation. So I'm just trying to figure this out in a way where you can chart like what was the evolution of thought here. Not just I jumped to a conclusion and said this is it. And so if you're that kind of a person, then I love that, because I'm here to explore what is true, not to tell you what you should think or anything like that. And if anything, Nemertean theory just opens the doors in your mind to go, maybe some of the things I've been told aren't true. Because how does that fit into this theory? Because something, like, generally speaking, the idea that the vagus nerve is conscious is just true. Like, that's just a truth. Okay? The vagus nerve is a separate consciousness. If you consider the idea of the subconscious or the other consciousness, it's very likely they're referring to primarily the vagus nerve. And maybe, you could say like, oh, your heart is conscious, but your heart is mainly a muscle that's wrapped heavily with your vagus nerve. So I would say probably the thing that's thinking is the vagus nerve wrapped around the heart in that area. So I get it when people say it's your heart's intelligence. I get what they're saying, but I also go, okay, well, there are so many microtubules jam-packed all around the heart, like this is like this thick field of microtubules around the heart. So yeah, the heart, it's like simplest way is just say like your heart intelligence, but it's still all part of your vagus nerve. It's all interconnected thing. So anyway, some really cool stuff. But yeah, other than that, goodness, I have an event I have to go to soon. I just want to look at some of the things. Oh, thank you for the birthday wishes, Barbara. And thank you, I Rule the World. And yeah, let's see. Just seeing if there's any kind of thing that pops out as yeah, just seeing any of these things. Oh yeah, the Mula Bandha. Thank you, Paragate Gate. The Mula Bandha is the muscle in the perineum that stimulates the vagus nerve, key to liberation for yogis. Also really important, also indicated as a snake type of figure going up to the top. I mean, does it get more obvious than that? I don't know. Again, it's very funny to it's very, very funny to look into this and go, I think that the universe, some would call, again, I'm not saying like there's a Christian God or a Jewish God or anything like that, but I understand why somebody would, in a spiritual contemplative practice, would be like, okay, there's definitely something there. It does seem like there's a wink right at us on this one. This is like the ultimate wink right in front of you, indicating there's probably something to what I'm saying, and that I'm not just making this up for the sake of internet points or whatever. Because this makes me look ridiculous. I know that. But at the same time, it could be the most genius freaking theory ever, technically. Like, actually, not to get too self-absorbed, but I think this paper could win me a Nobel Peace Prize. And I will remind you that what you've seen today and what I've even published isn't even close to the data that I've collected. Not even close. I have RNA data pointing that's been done on the proboscis separately from the warm body and of the human vagus nerve and the pig vagus nerve. And there's match. There's enough genetic data to validate that this is not some weird mystical correlatory theory. Okay. And so I just wanted to get the initial seeds down of the full theory, but there's a lot of supporting data for this, that's where it gets like, I love it where it goes from, haha, this is funny. Okay, whatever. Then once you see once you see what I've seen, there have been days where I'm just like sulking in my house going like, there's no way there's anything to this. There's too many things connecting here. And it's too weird. Like, again, the fact that it comes out of your forehead, that we still have vestigial third eyes, the pineal gland, the Vedic connections, the energy channels, the chakras, even the pathway and the mula bandha muscle that pulls back the proboscis and the vagus nerve. I'm like, holy shit. Okay, also one other thing is this proboscis stylet, once it sticks into the target, it can detach and it is regrown. And I was like, can the pineal gland be removed from the brain? And then what happens if you remove the pineal gland? It grows back. The pineal gland can be excised from the brain and it grows right back. So that was also kind of weird. There's a lot I've learned about this where I'm like, damn, the weirder thing is to actually be right about this. Trust me. So anyway, all right, guys. Well, hey, I maybe just for fun, I'll let Energy come up. You can get on here since you requested. I can't stay on too long, but yeah, if you just have like one question, trust me, I'll be on again. How you doing, Energy? Ask your question. What's up? You're up.
Hello.
Hey.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm listening to you, and so far, I'm glad I found your space. So I've been having trouble with my the wandering gland. I mean, the wandering nerve.
The wandering nerve, yeah.
The wandering nerve, the vagus nerve. Yeah, because you say it starts in the forehead.
So the vagus nerve would start in the pineal gland and descend all the way. I mean, what comes first is the neurons in the brain stem, and then they grow out in both directions, one towards the pineal gland and then one towards the rest of your body.
So you can look at it kind of like what you're stating and what I'm gathering from what you just said. If you use polarity and you would go back into in the opposite, you're stimulating it with ultrasound. Ultrasound to me also is one of the most interesting tools we have, and there's so many things that we're going to find that ultrasound is used for, or that we can use it for. So what you're saying about that you stimulated the vagus nerve with ultrasound, and it was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that was when I had like where I saw a white light with my eyes open, and it's not because I damaged my retina or anything like that. It's nothing bad. I mean, I have a expert knowledge in ultrasound tech, so it was at the right intensity, just enough to just gently stimulate the vagus nerve through the neck. And I was doing a Valsalva squeeze at the same time. So I was doing like just a light breathing and a squeeze with the diaphragm, which pinches the vagus nerve, which activates the vagus nerve. And then adding the ultrasound just tipped it way over into a level of activity that you just don't normally get. And then this is in 2017. I published this many times. I've talked about this on every podcast I've ever gone on to. This is what started me on the vagus nerve in the first place, from ultrasound of the brain to the vagus nerve. And then I saw out of what seemed to be my eyes, I saw what looked like New York Central Park, like a picture perfect recreation of Central Park in New York City in the summertime. Like it was hyper realistic too. And then this lasted for what felt like 15 minutes, but it only really would have been 45 seconds passed. So there's time dilation. And then after that was done, I got sucked right back into my body, and my eyes opened, and I was like, where am I now? And that was the first time I ever did ultrasound, like literally the first time that I ever did ultrasound on my vagus nerve. But I was professional at doing Wim Hof breathing. Like I could hold my breath for like 4 minutes. So, some people who try that type of practice for the very first time, they might not get that exact experience, but it's there to be experienced. And I've had other people try it, and I've done that for many years. And I see that I see that being a deeply therapeutic experience for people understanding that they're not just their mind, not just their body, that there's something else. And it's very, like, in a sense, healing or soothing or spiritually awakening for them. So yeah, that was with ultrasound and on the vagus nerve, as far as I see it.
Sounds like something that came to my mind when you were speaking, that it could be used to re-stimulate and reattach nerve.
Yeah. I mean, ultrasound can sort of stimulate the microtubules.
The vagus nerve.
Yeah, well,
so kind of like a polarity. You reverse, because we are an electrical unit.
Yeah.
So if we were to reverse, then go, send some kind of ultrasound message into the vagus nerve in the opposite direction that typically the energy goes from the brain, the forehead down, circulates through the system, and helps the system to rejuvenate and stay healthy. If you can do a light ultrasound reversal back up into the pineal gland, it sounds like it could be endless of possibilities of what this can actually do and actually help to. Something came to my mind. Okay, this is what came to my mind, is that this could actually help DNA to evolve. It sounds crazy, but it just came to my mind as you were speaking, and I'm like, because you brought up the snake, and you say, how interesting is that? Because see, I put the DNA, and when you see the snake, to me, that's DNA. The snake in the Bible is the DNA. So the vagus nerve could also be part of that, the snake storyline, and it's telling us the DNA, the vagus nerve, and if you know how to send a message back in reverse polarity through the vagus nerve, you can stimulate DNA, and the body can then evolve and rejuvenate itself in a much better fashion.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. I agree with you. And that's an area that I deeply think is worthy of exploring. And there's more stories I can tell about why I am pretty certain what you just said is totally accurate, but I don't want to get into it today because I do have another engagement I have to get to. But
yeah, this just came to me just listening to you in the last few minutes.
Well, so, there you go. There you go.
I'm very connected. I am.
I can tell by
I have a
your picture
with the universe. We all do. It's just a matter of belief, faith, with passion. So we all are there.
Yeah.
It's all there for us to connect with.
Yeah.
And it will give us the answers
absolutely
as they come to us. Yeah, it's awesome.
Awesome.
So I'll
man.
let you go. You say you're on your way.
Yeah.
I did send you a DM.
Cool.
So I'd like, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Energy. Yeah, guys. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. This was way bigger than I thought it would be. Holy cow. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be planning on doing more of these kinds of live streams and talking on these kinds of things. I think this is worthwhile to talk about. And I really want to explore the directions that this can go. I think this could be helpful for pretty much anybody with a vagus nerve on both the spiritual and the scientific. So anyway, thanks, guys. And also be sure to go read the full paper. I published it on the web. So it's a scientific theory now. I'm a published scientist as this theory is presented. So there will be opportunities as well to do peer review if you are also a scientist, and you can dig into some of the data as well for yourself. Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see y'all soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay. Great.